priority when it comes to their livelihood and especially their safety. Will the Premier today instruct the Minister of Justice to stop playing political games at the expense of correctional officers in Nova Scotia and to demand that he give his full and undivided attention to their safety and what is in the best interest of them and their families?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have to do that because the Minister of Justice is already doing it.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, the school year is winding down for students across the province, and these students are expected to meet deadlines for their final assignments. But right now, the government is behind on its assignments. The government failed to reach its deadline for the release of the TSP review. It's behind on releasing a response to the absenteeism report. We don't have the minister's response to the walking distance review or to the Black Learners Advisory Committee to report. My question to the minister, when are we going to see your response to these reports?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree there are some outstanding ministerial responses, and when I am fully satisfied that I understand the impact of any decisions of all those recommendations, then I will be prepared to make a public statement. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if our students gave that same response, they'd get failing grades. Madam Minister, do you believe your department should meet deadlines?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Just want to give the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, an example of the kind of homework and research that I'm trying to do as a responsible minister in this government. And for example, the Black Report. Minister Harris and I co-hosted 2 focus groups, one in Whitney Pier, covering representatives from the African Canadian communities from Guysborough up into Cape Breton. And we also had a focus group here in the metro area covering a number of community representatives from the mainland as well. And we heard very interesting points of view. They reaffirmed some of the recommendations coming forward. They raised some more questions and other information that we're checking into on some of the other issues. Certainly on the absenteeism one, that is a very difficult issue. As I understand it, there have been 3 major reviews of student engagement in this province since 2007. And I actually hosted 4 focus groups, 2 with principals, 1 with students, and 1 with parents, to make sure that I fully understood the impact of any possible decisions on those recommendations. So in terms of deadlines, when I'm ready to make an informed decision, I will give that information. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that the minister is very deliberate in her decisions and that she is doing the homework required. I just want to point out to her, however, that students and parents and teachers and principals and everyone involved in the education system are waiting. Thank you.
Order. The time for oral question period has expired. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of privilege.
Point of privilege.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
Yes, point of order, Mr. Speaker. During question period, the leader of the third party had used the word stole, which I believe is unparliamentary in the context of stole the jail. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask you to review Hansard and provide us with a ruling on that, please.
Yes, I will have a look at Hansard and see what's there. There was quite a lot of noise in here at the time. I was aware that the issue came forward, but I will review Hansard and make a decision from there. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, during question period, the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage referenced an economic analysis. on the impact in Southwest Nova with the removal of the Cat Ferry. And I would ask that for the benefit of all members that he would table the analysis that he referenced.
So the request is to table that analysis. I will review Hansard again and see what exactly was said. Okay. The Honourable House Leader for the Liberal Party.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, rising again on a point of order regarding comments made earlier today in question period by the Minister of Economic Development regarding Team West and Team Southwest. He gave the House the impression, or literally said to the House, that he was not going to give the names of those people who are on those committees. I'm suggesting to you, Mr. Speaker, that the point of order that minister should be required. If these people are appointed by the government, then the people of Nova Scotia have a right to know who they are. And I would ask that you order that minister to provide this House with the names of those people who are on those committees.
I will take that under review as well. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, they were not appointed by this House, Mr. Speaker. And further to that, Mr. Speaker, if and when you review Hansard, Mr. Speaker, you will find that he did not refuse to do that. What he actually did say was that he wanted to make sure that it was okay with these people. And many of these, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, are not so much appointed individuals as they are organizations, and therefore the organizations appoint them to that specific body, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Well, I guess I've got my work cut out for me here. I'll be reviewing quite a bit of Hansard, but we'll do just that. Okay, the Honourable Government House Leader.
I move now that you do now leave the chair. The House resolve itself into the Committee on the Whole House and supply unto Her Majesty.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to stand here today in my place and speak about something that's not only very dear to me, but very dear to other people in this House and should be dear to all the people in this province. And that is the Georges Bank of this province. Georges Bank's been talked a lot about in this House, but I'll guarantee you that 99% of you people in this place have not been to Georges Bank. Well, we got one. I think we can get two hands up here, maybe. But I can take you on a little trip to Georges. I can take you on a little trip to Georges Bank, one of the most uniquest banks off the southwest coast of Nova Scotia and off the east coast of Maine. Now this bank is offshore approximately 75 miles southwest of Yarmouth, and is offshore from the United States approximately 65 miles off of Maine. This bank is about 145 miles, nautical miles long, and it's about 75 nautical miles wide. Different lengths and different widths through it. But this bank comes up to a shoal. It's shallow in some parts of it, Mr. Speaker, that you can pretty near touch bottom with an oar on the shallow part of it. And on the deep side of this bank, it's over 2,000 fathom deep below the so-called Corsair Canyon. 2,000 fathom. That's 6,000 feet to the one. That's 12,000 feet down over the sides of that bank to the top of it. Now that gives you a little picture of the bank we're looking at. And the minister from the member from Shelburne's nodding his head because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. This bank is one of the most uniquest banks probably in the world. I won't get over off Australia and the coral reefs over there, the Great Barrier Reefs, but this is our Great Barrier Reef, Georges Bank. It also is United States. We only own 1/6 of this bank, by the way. We own 1/6 of the size of this bank. And I think that 1/6 of the size of that bank is probably one of the best producing pieces that produce the most fish. We've always believed that. This bank, below it, very, very small ways below it, probably within 2 or 3 steaming hours below that bank, the Gulf Stream runs. There's been many fishing schooners over the year, many scallopers over the year that got caught down there in storms and had to steam down in the wintertime and had to steam down into that Gulf Stream so they wouldn't ice up and freeze and roll over in gales and winds and hurricanes. And that's what saved them, was that Gulf Stream running up by it. This bank produces more fish, I believe. It records in North America, but I'll put it up to any fishing bank in the world. That's what this bank will produce. Right now, there's $1 billion, and the fishery's down. There's $1 billion worth of product. Lobster, scallop, haddock, cod, halibut, flounder, coming off that bank yearly. $1 billion. Where's it going? Now, that's going, most of it's going to the United States because they have the biggest share of that bank. Stands to reason, common sense. There's more fishermen. Now, to risk something like this, I don't know. To me, you know, it's a scary thing. Dan, I want to tell you a story. I've been on that bank many times. I've been there as a crew member. I've been there as a captain, 60, 65-foot boats. I was down there one night just above the Corsair Canyon. That Corsair Canyon is 1,000 feet deep. We was fishing up on the bank 60, 70 fathom up above it. And there was a research ship there that night. And I listened to them on Channel 16 while we was dragging their trawl. And that scientist come on there and said, we've put cameras down in the Corsair Canyon. We had to quit. We ran out of cable, but they went down there over 300 fathom, and they never seen so many lobsters in the holes in the side of the Corsair Canyon in their life. Every 6 inches there was a hole. It looked like bird holes in a bank. In every one of those holes, millions of them had a lobster in them. In the Corsair Canyon. They couldn't get below 300 fathom. They never had gear enough, but the holes were still going. And probably right to 1,000 fathom deep of lobster on the side of that bank. That bank is probably 7 or 8 miles wide, long, and 1,000 fathom deep, 6,000 feet deep. Now there's a wall full of lobster. That's how great the lobster were on that side of that bank. I mean, the tides on this bank, the tides on it are unreal. They circle, and they go up to 3 to 4 miles per hour. They just circle that bank and circle that bank, and then they spin off. It's just like the atmosphere around the earth. As it's turning, it spins. The tide never stops there. I never ever see slack tide there. It just goes and it spins the water off as it's spinning around this 140-mile wide bank. There was a fell overboard off a container ship, like a 700-foot container ship, and that ship probably being 5 or 6 stories high. And the sea went over that boat on that bank and washed that man off. He was found up in the Bay of Fundy on Digby Neck shore 2 weeks later on the beach. That's where that tide spins. That's how far. That was over 120 miles in less than 3 weeks. Maybe he got there sooner, but he was dead. That's where them tides spun him. That's how far. They spin him right to the head of the Bay of Fundy. Clear up the eastern shore, probably they're spun clear to the Hay Banks here off of Halifax. That's how wide that system is off of the Georges Bank. Now, I don't know what would ever happen if an oil eruption ever happened there, but I can tell you one thing, it would be bigger than what we're seeing in Australia right now. I guarantee it. I can see it wiping out the whole Gulf of Maine if it ever got big enough. I don't want to get into any scare tactics. And I'll tell you how rough it can get on George's Bank. How much time I got left, Mr. Speaker? But
You have about 7 minutes.
oh, lots of time. Lots of time.
It's a great story. It's a great story.
I was on George's Bank one time in June. In June, the weather forecast I had the boat, the 60-foot boat, 60 by 20 feet wide, pretty good sized boat. I went to George's Bank that night. It only given 25, 30 knot of wind. This was in June, the 1st of June. Never expected any more than that. That night, it breezed up on George's Bank. About 9 o'clock that night, it just kept breezing and breezing out of the northeast. About midnight, that wind was up to 16, 70 knot of wind out of the northeast. We was down the lower part of the bank. I said, I gotta either get up over the bank, get up into the channel, or if we go here, we'll be blown down the Gulf Stream by daylight. So up the bank we go. I don't know how many hours it took us. We was all night getting up there. And I made a mistake that night. And if you ever watched the Perfect Storm, you might understand what I mean. We left our arms out to the side of the boat, 40-foot arms with 40 feet of chain hanging off each end of them, and a fish we called in the water about 4 or 6 feet wide with a shaft on the front of it to steer it and a big fin on the back to hold it straight. And this shaft's about 4 inches big around and about 2 feet out to the front of this big flat thing in the chain. And they go flat in the water, and it slows your boat up from rolling. That night, I left them out in that gale of wind. And when I got above the bank, pretty near daylight, before we got above the bank in the deeper water where it was a little bit calmer, and it wasn't calm because you see this height of this ceiling? That's what was coming at us that night. Look up like that, and the top's breaking off on them. 30 feet easy on the shoal of that bank. This is only 60-mile-an-hour wind. Can you imagine 120 knot of wind? I don't know what kind of oil rigs they got, but you'd want a damn good one on that shoal of that George's Bank, no, I'm telling you, because you'll see 60, 70-foot seas there. No problem on the shoal of that bank. That night, we shut her down and laid to. We said, we'll lay to with them out. I seen it coming at us, one of them, and she went down. That boat rolled down like that. I didn't know whether it was coming back, and she slatted. When she fell down the other side, she slatted and she whipped that great big fish out there on that 40. She whipped it, and when she fell down again, she pulled it straight down out of the air. And here was this thing coming down. I was sitting in the wheelhouse in front, and this fish come down, just like a torpedo, right in front of me, the wheelhouse. It went through 2 layers of inch plywood plus fiberglass. It was just like a torpedo hit us. And I said that night, my heart stopped, the note stopped. And you know, I never prayed so hard. I wasn't a religious man then, but I never prayed so hard in all my life that night. That's how rough that was that night. I'd never seen it that rough before in my life. And it was only 60-mile-an-hour wind on the shoal water of that bank. I wouldn't want to see 120 knot of wind. I don't know. But I made a mistake. You don't leave them out. If you watch The Perfect Storm, he shouldn't have had them out that night, because I experienced it. When it's rough, you don't leave nothing dangling. You tighten everything up. Batten the hatches, including stabilizers. But that's how rough it can get on that bank. That's the point I'm trying to make. And I don't know what would happen. I don't know what would happen if we ever got... It produces fish for the Bay of Fundy, produces lobster, produces scallops. Up to the eastern shore, we don't know really how far the fish come in. And the fish are just coming back on that bank after the fishery being down. And there's people nervous, worrying what this could do if by fooling around there drilling oil. In the last few days of hearing about these big spills around Alaska there, covering 9,000 square kilometers, 400,000 liters a day or something. If that ever got out on George's Bank, The point is, we don't know where you couldn't stop it. You could never stop this oil. It would fill the head of the bay full. I know it would. That body come off that ship below George's in 2-3 weeks, found it up in the Bay of Fundy on the Digby Neck shore. So you can imagine what crude oil or any kind of oil out of the ground would do off that bank. And if anybody knows what George's Bank is like, and the Minister of Fisheries, the member from Shelburne, knows exactly what I'm saying. And in his heart, he knows if a disaster ever happened on George's Bank, this province fishery would be done. And also the American shore of Maine. I truly believe that. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member, for a very informed and entertaining dialogue. The honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My honour to stand and speak for a few moments. It's a hard act to follow when the member for Digby Annapolis gets up and talks about his experiences as a fisherman. Of course, he's been on George's Bank way more times than I ever was. But I can attest to what I've heard. My father, who just recently retired after about 47 years of being in the fishery, has a lot of experiences just like that, and many of them a little scarier than we want to admit a lot of the time. Mr. Speaker, the member for Digby Annapolis does speak to the dangers that our fishermen put themselves under. And more of a modern show that people can watch. Of course, the Deadliest Catch that we watch on Discovery quite often. That's just that's a daily thing on George's Bank. That's a daily thing for our lobster fishermen off of southwest Nova Scotia. You know, when everybody else is tying up their boats, the lobster fishermen are going out to make their money. So if I talk about what's important to southwest Nova Scotia, you know, I do have to start exactly where the member for Digby Annapolis left off, and it is what will happen to our fishery in southwest Nova Scotia should the moratorium be lifted on George's Bank. You know, if we look at what's happening on that bank, if we look at the replenishment, what's happening within that water column, we continually see a regeneration on that bank, which is not being seen in many other banks across the world. Looking at the Grand Banks, looking up Back Row Bank, and all those other areas, they're not coming back the way George's Bank continues to survive. And the member is quite accurate. There's not just a tide. I mean, if we talk about the greatest tides in Nova Scotia being in the Bay of Fundy, there's a reason. There's a pivot point that as the water comes around counterclockwise around the Atlantic, it sort of hooks itself up on Cape Island in the member for Shelburne's area, and sort of flows itself around George's Bank in a way, and up and up. So what happens quite often is this sort of this vortex of water that continues to come around, and you know, many longliners and other fishermen would say, you know, if you lose a high flyer, which of course is a big buoy with a radar stand on it, well, if you lose it, well, chances are give it a cycle or a couple cycles, you'll be able to pick it pretty much up where you thought you lost it, because it will come itself back around. So they're continually fighting those waters. So the question really is whether or not that, you know, should our side of George's Bank look at oil exploration, you know, what is going to be the impact? What is going to be the safety of a rig on George's? Well, if there is a spill, you know, where is it going to end up? It's going to end up on the whole bank, not just in that little spot that the oil or gas or what have you, drilling mud, might be dropped. It's going to end up around over the whole bank, not just the Canadian side, but the American side as well. And after a couple of cycles, it's going to end up on Briar Island. It's going to end up on Long Island. It's going to end up in Matagan. It's going to end up in Yarmouth. It's going to end up in Pubnico, and it's going to end up in Shelburne County. That's the danger of looking at this. And yeah, the science will show I'm very confident that it will show that there is safe drilling, there are new methods, there are new technologies, all of those things at protecting the environments in which those rigs will reside. But there's still a chance. There's a chance that something might fail and there will be a catastrophic damage to that environment. And I don't know, but the people I talk to in the Pubnicos and the fishermen that I talk to in Wedgeport look at that small chance as too much of a chance. We shouldn't chance it at all. Now, our feeling on this all along has been to put the independent panel back in place, just like happened in the first No Rigs campaign, to review the information, to look at what's happening, and to render a decision. Not left in the hands of the government, where you don't know exactly what's going on. Put it in an independent group, they can make a decision, and we're confident, I'm confident, and I think the member for Digby-Annapolis and Liberals would be confident that they'll render a decision saying the risks are still too great to explore on Georges Bank. And Mr. Speaker, not only is it the drill platform that we worry about, and this is from a previous Minister of Fisheries when there was exploration going off of Cape Breton Island. It's the impact of the exploration itself, the seismic testing that will happen in that area. You know, what is that impact on the fish stock? What is it on haddock? What is it on cod? What is it on the flounder? What is it on the lobster? What is it on the crab? We don't know. That's the part that's frustrating about the science around seismic testing. You can't conclusively say that it does affect the fishery, but you can't say it doesn't either. And as a government, they're going to find it extremely frustrating because it will be, in my estimation, a hung jury. Some will say you can do it, others will say you can't. So put the panel in place, just like we did back in 1988, I believe. And I know that the Minister of Fisheries at that time would have been an advocate for no rigs on Georges at that time. I know the member for Digby-Annapolis was an advocate on it. Mr. Speaker, I know on I was a little just graduating from high school at that time, but made sure that I had even a sticker on my truck to make sure that it said no rigs on Georges. Because we can't chance it. We just can't chance it. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'll move on from that one, but I think you say from a member for Argyle is there to support his people, and his people are fishermen and fisher people, and they say no rigs on Georges, so I'm going to say no rigs on Georges. Mr. Speaker, the final point that I do want to bring up is the issue that I brought up in question period today, is the confusion that we continue to see around the help for Yarmouth County, the help for the tourist industry, the help for the displaced workers, the people that are going to be wondering what they're going to do next. Mr. Speaker, I know the intention of the NDP government has been to provide a function to help the people, and they went and set up this group called Team West. You know, probably a few days after the federal government had done the same thing and set up Team Southwest. Now, people on the ground don't care where the help is going to come from. And I really ultimately don't care where that help is going to come from. I just want to see some help. I want to see a clear, concise mandate and mechanism that the businesses and tourist operators in Southwest Nova Scotia can go to and get that help. Right now we have a government, two governments really, that are saying we've got a process, we've got names for our groups, and we need to put them together. And like I said in question period, I really don't care what it's called. If it's Team Southwest, if it's Team West, if it's Team Paris, or it's Team whatever. Just stick to one organization that's going to look at the impact in Southwest Nova Scotia and take all their funding and help together and make sure that we make it through 2010. This season is probably the most important season. We need to be able to keep our infrastructure in place. The Village Historique de la Nouvelle-Écosse is in Pubnico. The Musée Acadien is in Pubnico. The Tuna Museum is in Wedgeport. The archives in Tuscan Archives and Jail in Tuscan. And I could go on and on of these organizations that are, of course, volunteer organizations that deserve to know how they're going to be able to survive for this season. But never mind those organizations, because those ones are at least have some provincial funding. But what about the Red Caps? What about the Hickory Huts? What about the Marcos? What about the Ultramars? What about the Paul d'Entremont Marines? What about all those small businesses that depended on the visitors to buy a little product, to buy a piece of pottery, to buy a painting, to buy some gas, to buy some of the best chowder in all of Nova Scotia? These are the people that we need to help, and we need to help them now. Mr. Speaker, like I said during my questioning, and I know I only have a couple minutes left here. High five? Thank you very much. You know, my parents, for the second year in a row, decided they would go to sunnier climes and made it down to Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi. And, after 70-odd days of cold weather in the south, they worked their way back up and took the Digby boat. And they came across the Digby boat, and there was another trailer. They went down with their fifth wheel, so they basically packed up house and home and went on down and came on back. But on their way back, they were parked right next to another fifth wheel trailer who was from BC. They were from BC. And, a little early for our season, but this does begin our shoulder seasons. The success of our tourist industry has been not only this big tourist season in the summer, but to be able to cater to our shoulder seasons that begin now and, of course, end sometimes in October. And we're starting it now. And there is nothing there to help our tourist industry. So, of course, my father, knowing the situation that's going on, talked about the lobster industry, talked about coming on down, having some of the best lobsters in the world, come to Yarmouth, do this and do that. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? They said, no, we're not going to do that. It wasn't on our map. We're not going to go and do it. Originally we wanted to maybe do something else. We might go to Halifax. We might head off to PEI afterwards, and that's it. But had the work been done, maybe we would have had a bit of a marketing campaign for the people coming to Nova Scotia now. Not later, now. I mean, this happened, Mr. Speaker, back in December, just before Christmas. That's when this happened. So we've had a lot of lead time to come up with a plan. The Minister of Economic Development, the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage, has known about this decision since December. All right, so January, February, March, now the end of April. So there's, 4 months. I'll give them December, because December is a lost month anyway because of Christmas and all the vacations that happen around it. But you had to figured by now, rather than just having a group that's called Team West, that they'd actually have a plan. They'd have what they're going to do. They'd have a mandate, and they'd have people sitting on their group. Mr. Speaker, the frustrating part is that there are no answers to our questions. The member for Clare, the member for Victoria, we've all asked questions about what's Team West, what we're going to do for tourism, and we don't get the answers. We need to get moving. The season is upon us, and yet there is nothing. We need to be able to find a way to entice the people to Yarmouth, to Shelburne, to Digby, in those areas that right now are being forgotten, because it's not showing in the map. It's really not in the doers and dreamers. There's no quotation say, by the way, we really like you to come here. But what is Team West going to do? What is Team Southwest going to do? I have a lot of faith that Team Southwest is doing what it's supposed to be doing, They had their meeting on Saturday. A lot of people showed up to it, and they're moving forward. I don't know what Team West is doing, you know, and that frustrates me. That frustrates the people in Southwest Nova Scotia. What is it going to do? Is it going to focus on tourism? And what we're hearing, and it's not just going to be tourism. It's going to be forestry. It's going to be fishery. And by the way, it's going to be 5 other counties. So the actual help for Yarmouth is going to be minimal. You know, take $200,000 that was announced by the Premier when he came down and split that up 5 ways. It's nothing for Yarmouth. It's $20,000. They can't do much with that. So, Mr. Speaker, this budget, this government has left Southwest Nova Scotia out in the lurch. And all that I ask as a member, as a resident of Southwest Nova Scotia, is let's pick up the pieces, let's get moving, and let's help Southwest Nova Scotia. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. Motion carried.
Good afternoon. The Committee on Supply will now be called to order, and we will resume the estimates in the Premier's office. And I will now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North, who has 54 minutes left.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I am glad that we're back in the chamber with estimates, and I want to note that I'll be sharing my time today with the honourable member for Inverness, and look forward to another opportunity as well to come and continue with the estimates debate. But when we last left off, I think we were pretty much establishing the fact that the government, through its many consultative and outsourcing to try and find ways to get themselves to a position to try and justify some of the decisions as ill-headed as they are, to try and do that and put it on the backs of a previous government rather than being forthright and commit to the facts as we now know them. And under the auspices of the Public Accounts Committee, and maybe it was the newness of government members on the Public Accounts Committee, because it was actually one topic that got slid through by the committee that otherwise they would have voted against had they probably been more prepped by the staff in the Premier's office, because we see topics that are not coming forward that are relevant and important for discussion. But this is going to be a pattern I'm sure we'll see ensuing till next time the writ is dropped, and then Nova Scotians can make the change they now wish they could reverse at any moment's notice. And we'd be happy for a writ to drop to get that changed sooner than later. But, Mr. Chair, what we need to know and clarify, again, is that the government has been so desperate to try and position themselves and to stack a deficit in the first year and go against the advice of their advisors that they spent a lot of money to put in place. And the fact that, indeed, the books of the province of Nova Scotia weren't cooked. The reality is the government made decisions. We would argue many of those were bad decisions. There were many things that were in there from the previous budget in May that committed to the infrastructure and stimulus. That we're thankful that the government saw fit to continue on and maximize any dollars that could be there to be leveraged. We regret that the government hasn't chose to invest and leverage other dollars, for instance, with health promotion and protection, but they would spend 100% dollars on dirt that no one asked them to buy and no one was in a lineup to get. And really, I suppose the Minister of Natural Resources truly could be the Minister of Swamps and Bogs, because that's all they seem to be fixated on as well in their capital acquisitions, rather than indeed investing in people at a time when economic recovery should be paramount and top priority of the government. So I also, when we come back, I know I'm looking forward to a further discussion with the Premier, especially around other things that were supposed to be good news in Nova Scotia, supposed to be great moments in Nova Scotia, such as the royal visit. And with that coming forward for the 100th anniversary of the Navy, with Her Majesty coming here, with her family's long history of coming to Nova Scotia, yet the government threw the Royal Nova Scotia International Tattoo under the bus as well. And the Premier and his office is directly involved with making sure that that was scuttled, to making sure that an internationally renowned organization such as the Tattoo, who's had 4 members of the royal family attend without issue, without any incidents, because they're professionals and because they make sure that safety and operations of an event go very well to an international standard, in fact, to a standard that Buckingham Palace obviously has been very pleased with in the past. But it's a standard that the Premier and his office didn't see fit because it didn't meet with their political optics of what they wanted at the moment, and they get into a personality battle back and forth and basically scuttled what was supposed to be a very great moment for Her Majesty, and culminating. The very monarch that provided the royal designation to the Tattoo, the very monarch that has served with such greatness, in my opinion, and I am a monarchist in Canada. I believe in the institution, and not in terms of what it was decades or 100 years ago, but that it represents what is right about our British parliamentary traditions and democracy that we celebrated here last year. And it's just regrettable that petty politics of the Premier's office would interfere with such a good event. But we'll come back to that, and I've got my specific binder to the royal visit that we'll talk about in greater detail. And yes, there will be questions that the Premier can answer. But with that preamble of where I'll be going, and with that setting the tone, I also, and knowing that the real back to balance that Nova Scotians were looking for right now is some common sense from the government to get really back to the core issues and priorities of Nova Scotians. And I'm very pleased our finance critic will take over at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I would like to thank the honourable member from Cape Breton North for his introductory remarks. And I think I will move right into the questioning. And for the benefit of the people who are watching, I would like to draw their attention to my questions and to see if they'll actually be answered today. My first question to the Premier. There were a number of election promises made in the 2009 election, and two of the most significant were a call for a balanced budget and that there would be no increase in taxes for Nova Scotia. And what have we seen? We've seen those promises broken. We see a deficit budget the past year, the first NDP deficit budget, and they plan to give us 4 more for a total of 5 deficit budgets. A broken promise. We also see increased taxes. HST increase as one example. Mr. Premier, why did you tell Nova Scotians that you would do one thing, namely balance the budgets and not increase taxes, and do another?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be back for our estimates of my office, and to have the opportunity to, of course, to hear the introductory remarks of the member for Cape Breton North. And getting up and making remarks and then sitting down without asking a question is a little bit of hit and run, Mr. Chairman. So I do want to take the opportunity and I think it works well, because it is in fact in addressing the very point that was made by the member from Inverness, which is the whole question of how we got to where we are. And I think that was fairly well laid out in the Deloitte report. I mean, they were pretty clear about the path that we were on, the fact that there was an active campaign by the previous government to try and make the books look one way when they were in fact another. And I find it interesting, because the criticism that was launched by the member from Cape Breton North was that you didn't follow the advice of Deloitte when you decided to put back in the prepayment for the memorandum of understanding with the universities. And of course, the very logical question that comes from that is, who established the practice of prepaying the university memorandum of understanding? That was the previous government, and it meant that they had fashioned a budget. They had fashioned a budget that had no money in it for post-secondary education, no money in it for the universities of the province. Now, I think anyone who considers that just for a second would say, well, how in the name of all that is good and great could that possibly be considered a balanced budget when there are some $360 million in costs that are not recognized in the budget of the previous government? Well, of course that's wrong. But that was a decision that they made, and we felt that the previous government should be responsible for the decisions that they made. They made the decision to enter into this MOU. They made the decision to prepay the university funding. And so, Mr. Chairman, when the government changed on June 9th and we brought back in the previous budget, we included in that budget what we felt was the reasonable thing to do, which was to include the costs of the university funding in accordance with the terms of the memorandum of understanding signed by the previous government. So, of course, that created the obviousness of the deficit. Further, even though the previous government knew that they were going to have to be dealing with the costs associated with the H1N1 pandemic, there was no money included in the budget for those costs. This was something that governments right across the country were having to deal with, but there was no money in the budget for that. And there was just a series of decisions that had been made, along with, of course, the idea that that somehow all of a sudden the costs that they had already imposed, this is what the last budget said before they were defeated, that the costs they already imposed were going to magically the next year become a 0% increase. That health costs were not going to grow at all. In fact, that across the board, that cost increase for government were going to be zero. Well, it's just, that was not the history of the government. The history of the government was to watch while spending increased at 4 and 5% every year, regardless of what the actual growth in the revenues of the province were. They treated what were revenues associated with natural gas royalties as if they were fixed revenues over the long term, as if somehow the projections with respect to the offshore were not going to come true, that the production of the Sable project was not going to start to drop off. I mean, they knew the direction that royalty rates were headed in. And so what happened, of course, is we inherited a budget that then had to deal with all of the costs that weren't included. We had to deal with the associated loss of revenue from the decline in offshore revenues and royalties, and also the decline in production. And so what we saw, and what I thought Deloitte did very well, was they set out that the path that the previous government was on. And the previous government was on a path to create a $1.4 billion deficit. Now that's a deficit each year of $1.4 billion. And we know, and I'm sure in his heart of hearts, the member for Inverness knows that that's not a sustainable position for the province. And of course, we invite the members of the opposition to suggest where it is that they would go in terms of the kinds of cuts that they would make. And in the past, the member for Cape Breton North and others have said, well, you didn't have to spend money on land, for example. Well, Mr. Chairman, as I believe the member for Cape Breton North actually refers to it as dirt. Well, and he derides it as swamps and bogs, and yet if you look at the acquisitions that were made by the province and where they were made for pieces of property that were of particular interest to the government, either from an ecological perspective, in that we wanted to make sure that the areas were protected, from a historical perspective, because there are negotiations currently underway with Aboriginal peoples in this province. Part of those negotiations revolve around the question of land and land acquisition and access to natural resources in the province. And thirdly, that property that is purchased looked at the recreational value of that property to the people of the areas in which the property is located. So you have hunters, you have trappers, you have snowmobile enthusiasts, yes, you have off-road vehicle enthusiasts, you have hikers, you have all manner of people who use the wonderful asset which is the great outdoors of Nova Scotia. And the program of government was designed to try, when that property was on the market and before it could fall into foreign hands where we may not be able to get it back, to purchase that property so that there would be a lasting legacy for the generations to come, so that young people in these areas would have the same ability to experience wildlife and the great outdoors in this province that we have been privileged to be able to experience. So we shouldn't be derided. I think, out there among the vast majority of Nova Scotians, people say, we realize that time is difficult. We realize you came in at a very difficult time. We also realize that that property wasn't going to be for sale forever, and you made the right decision purchasing it when you did. Now, we move on to this set of budget estimates, and this year, and you will see that the amount of money that's in the estimates for the purchase of land has then now fallen back to what is considered to be a more traditional level, relatively small amount of money in the overall budget. So this was exactly the point we tried to make to the member for Cape Breton North and others who would say, well, if you wanted to balance the budget, why didn't you cut that? Because that's a one-time expense. It's a one-time expense for a generation or generations of benefit. What better investment could we make? But now we're into a new set of estimates, and the question, I think fairly, is now that you don't have that to point to, then what is it that you say we should cut? What is it in the Department of Health? Which programs in the Department of Education no longer merit support? I mean, these were, after all, programs that, at least in theory, were supported by the members opposite over the course of their time in government. The pharmacare program that was established. Is that something you would see cut? I mean, it was something that was brought in. The many other programs that we deliver to young people in this province. What is it that you feel should be cut in order to be able to achieve what you say should be done in the short term? Because after all, Mr. Chairman, the proposal that is made by the member opposite is completely inconsistent with what other governments in Canada are doing, including the federal government. Mr. Chairman, the federal government has set out a plan to deal with what is a very large deficit over a considerable period of time. And frankly, in my conversations with the Prime Minister and certainly in my conversations with ministers, I understand the difficulties that they have, and I understand the challenges that they have on the in their books. But what I don't want to see happen is I don't want to see them decide that they are going to try and fix their problems with respect to their federal budget by taking money out of the transfers to the province. Because ultimately, Mr. Chairman, and you know this because you've been in this House for a while and perhaps the member for Inverness does not, but we all know that the budgets of this House are symptoms of what happens in Ottawa with federal transfers. And we know that agreements with respect to the social transfers, with respect to the health transfers, are going to be coming up for renewal in the not-too-distant future. And something that could be extraordinarily devastating to this province would be if the federal government should decide to take money out of those envelopes as they come to the province, because that would create even more difficulty. Now, I want to, at this point, say that I understand from everything that I have read and from what my departmental officials say and from what I understand from the Department of Finance, that the Federal Minister of Finance has said that this will not happen, that he has no intention of balancing the books on the backs of the provinces, and I appreciate and I laud that position because I think it's the right one. But I also know that they can't go on forever with budget deficits at the federal level. They have a much better ability to raise revenues than we do. But they also have to, I mean, the Mulroney government had much the same abilities to do that, but they were unable to meet those targets. And frankly, if you go back and review that era a bit, you'll see that one of the things that really caused trouble was not so much the amount of money that was spent in services over the Mulroney years, but it was the interest on the debt and the higher interest rates that really worked against the federal government on those in those years that caused those budget deficits to continue to grow. And I certainly remember much of the unhappiness around the Mulroney government when they brought in the GST. And you'll remember that it was the Mulroney government that actually brought in the GST. And what it did, the member from Inverness says to replace another tax, and all that, though that's true, it's only true to the extent that it replaced a tax that was much narrower in its base than the GST. The GST became a broad-based tax that went on to everything. It became, a kind. The only parallel I can think of, it's like the secret police that sneaks into your room at night and carries you away, Mr. Chairman, because it was everywhere. Whether you bought a pair of socks or a pair of gloves, this was the insidious nature of the GST. It was just completely broad-based. It was voracious as a tax. It still is, but it is what we have now for a taxing measure, and of course, it is exactly why we took the view that we did. Exactly why. Because we said, sometimes there are things that just ought not to be taxed. There are some things that it is unfair for people to have to pay tax on. For example, we looked at home heating costs, home electricity costs, and we said, and just prior to the election, I guess it was of 2006, there was a conversion by the former government when they all of a sudden recognized that home energy costs shouldn't be taxed. They made that as a commitment over the course of the campaign, and of course this was in response to the work that my colleagues and I had been doing around the voracious nature of the HST. And they announced just prior to an election, of course, we all understand, all things are possible just before an election. And so they announced that they would take the tax off of home energy. When they did that, I think it was for a year. And then they put it back on electricity costs. They put in a threshold, and we said, no, really this was the commitment that was made by the government, and if this was the commitment that they made, it should be lived up to. And of course, one of the very first things we did when we got elected in June of 2009 was to, in fact, take the HST off of home electricity costs. We also took the HST off of children's clothing, another item which we said ought not to be taxed. We took it off of diapers. We took it off of feminine hygiene products. We looked at the list of things that we could do within taxation to try and deliver what we considered to be fairer taxation, Mr. Chairman, so that we could recognize the inequities that exist. So within the balance that is needed in order to bring the finances of the province back, unlike what is suggested by the member for Inverness, we decided that we would approach it in a way that people could understand, that would make sense to them. That's why instead of just taking the broad brush and say we're going to raise the HST by 2%, we said, and I think this was the wisdom not just of my cabinet, but of many of the people we spoke to, of our caucus, of many of the people who work on behalf of the poor in the province, said, we understand that you have a difficult position. We understand that part of what you need to do, besides growing the economy and managing your expenses, part of what you have to do is raise revenue. We want to make sure that you don't disproportionately affect the people who actually need the help the most. Those people who are struggling to make ends meet. So what we did, what the Minister of Finance announced in this budget, and what we did was we put in place an affordability tax credit that more than offsets the cost of the HST. In fact, those families as a result of this budget, will have more money in their pockets. And we did that because it is, in fact, the right thing to do. We understood that we could get back to balance quicker if we didn't do it. We could raise more revenue that way, but that it would be unfair, and that ultimately people understand that is probably no really easy time to be in government. But they understand that when you come in under the cloud of recessionary pressures that existed as they did at the time that we came into government, when you are under the cloud of the kind of systemic and structural financial problems that have been created by the previous government, that there does need to be action taken. They understand that. But they want to be treated fairly. And I believe that the budget that the Minister of Finance has brought forward does that. It creates a fair approach to bringing the books and finances of the province back into balance, so that taxation is fairer, so that we get that monkey off our backs, Mr. Chairman, that we're able to deal with the finances of the province in a reasonable fashion. So, you know, the member for Inverness says, well, why did you raise taxes? Why are the books not balanced? But the answer to his questions is sitting right in front of him, just one row up. Those were the members of the Executive Council who made the decisions that put the province into the position it's in. You know, he doesn't really need to ask the question in estimates. He could ask it at the next caucus meeting that he has, because the answers to those questions reside among the very members of his own caucus. And I have to say, and another thing that they like to say is that, you know, well, why is it that you supported budgets, you voted for budgets, if you say that this was the case? Well, Mr. Chairman, the budgets that were presented as if they were balanced. They were presented in the nature of doing many good things on behalf of people. And we had no problem with doing good things for people. We weren't, and I can remember the members of the government opposite saying, if you vote against this, you are voting against projects in downtown Windsor. You're voting against the fire department in Windsor. You're voting against the rink. You're voting, you know, that was the way that they would present the budgets to us. And we said, Mr. Chairman, that we didn't have a problem, but we wanted to be assured, and we were time and again by the previous government, that the budgets that they were presenting were actually sustainable, and they said they were. We were skeptical, and then finally in the last budget, of course, it appeared pretty obvious that was not going to be the case. So I understand. I understand that this is the approach that the member for Inverness takes. He likes to paint it as if somehow the election is like a fly stuck in amber, that it's a moment frozen in time, and that you must only dissect it as if it is somehow a pristine piece all of its own that can be held up to the light and shown to people. But that's not the reality of government. That's not the reality of life, Mr. Chairman. The reality is that the timeline changes, things move, new information come into play, and in fact, in this case, we had the Deloitte report, we had the economic panel and the economic panel's conclusions and their recommendations, and one of the things that those recommendations said, Mr. Chairman, was that we should take the opportunity to have a broad-based consultation with the people of the province, and we did that. We went We went out across the province, took the opportunity to speak to people in their homes, on their doorsteps, invited them out to the community centres, had them talk to us about the issues associated with the budget that we've brought in. And although the member's office say, well, this is not what you heard, it is what we heard. And we got lots of feedback in the way of written proposals. We did our best to balance off all of the interests that were there, including, of course, the interests of small business, which is why you saw the reduction in the small business tax credit. So I think that's a fairly thorough examination of that issue that was prompted both by the introductory remarks of the member from Cape Breton North and the excellent question that was just posed by the minister from, or the member from Inverness. And I am reminded now of a person who used to speak a lot in this House, and that was John Home, and he would often stand up and say, I just have a couple of words to say. And so I have just had a couple of words to say about this, and I look forward, of course, to a much longer discourse on whatever the next question might be.
Thank you. The honourable member for Inverness.
Well, Mr. Chair, what would I know? I'm the newest member in this House, but I thought I would come here today and ask a few questions and thought I might get some punchy answers. I thought there'd be some good dialogue. Of course, the purpose of having an opposition is to question things, and when we question things, we make them better. So I think I'm going to have to be careful here in asking questions, because all our time will elapse and Nova Scotians won't have any of their questions answered. Now, the first question I asked was, why did the Premier break his promise to Nova Scotians by not delivering a balanced budget and by raising taxes? And his answer was very lengthy. And there's a few points that I will, and thorough, and I will speak on some of the points that he raised. But one thing I would ask is, I did ask, why would you tell Nova Scotians one thing and do another? And I guess the obvious response to that is, well, we didn't know how bad things were. Well, if that was the case, what were you doing when you were in opposition? I had a good look at this budget, and I know in great detail what I don't like about it. And I've stated that here in the House. So I guess it either says that the NDP are incompetent, or they just want to switch things around to make it look like they want for Nova Scotians. And I think we'll let Nova Scotians be the judge. Progressive Conservatives delivered 8 balanced budgets. They're planning to deliver 5 deficit budgets. So I think when it comes to credibility, we'll let a balanced budget speak for itself, Mr. Chair. Some of the things the Premier mentioned was, that he was left with a spending mess. And the Finance Minister likes to say a structural mess. And I understand that term. I know for many Nova Scotians, if they do not, what that means is that there's things inherent in the budget every year that have to be expended unless there's going to be a transformational change. Now, what I find interesting is the NDP voted for many of these budgets from 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. They voted for these budgets. They were in favor of them. Now, they say that a mess was left to them, but they haven't really done anything on the expenditure side with this budget in 2010, Mr. Chair. And some of the expenses that the Finance Minister named yesterday, they weren't structural expenses, they were one-time expenses. And the Premier and the Minister of Finance like to ask me, well, member from Inverness, what would you cut? But I'm not sitting on the government side. You don't have that option. I don't have that option. And yes, the Premier says that that's a bailout, but when I pose the question to you, you bail out of it. You bail out of it. And I think that's something that's important. It's the biggest thing that's missing out of this budget. And well, yeah, you should have. Like, you can't have it.
Order, please. Order. The honourable member for Inverness has the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can't have it both ways. And for Nova Scotians, if they haven't turned the channel yet, if anybody is listening, I think that what this government says is that a mess was created before them, but they don't want to change any of that. They're afraid to point out anything. Now, it took great courage for John Hamm to balance the budget in 2002, 2003. And that was a good thing. I think we'll all agree. Now, Nova Scotians made sacrifices to balance that budget. But I will say, now that I'm elected in this House, and I'm proud to say it, that was the right thing to do. And I think that this government has to start looking at the expenditure side of the balance sheet, of the operating sheet for government. And they haven't. I'm going to make a comment on a couple of other items here. Our revenues are a significant portion of this conversation. And there was some concern raised about federal revenues, and they make up, I believe it's, I can't remember if it's 40 or 60% of the provincial budget. I would say it's about 40% of the provincial budget is federal revenues. And I met with the federal Minister of Finance a little over a month ago, and he indicated to me that federal transfers were at an all-time high and they're going to be stable. So I think that point needs to be made, needs to be put on the books. Another question I would ask the Premier is what would he do to change things? He's complaining about the Tories this year. What is he going to do for the next 3 years? What is he going to do when he goes back to the electorate in 4 years? Is he going to say the Tories made this mess? He's going to have to accept responsibility. Well, you're not going to clean it up because you're already telling us you're going to continue to run deficits. That's not good for Nova Scotia. I truly believe that. Now, we talk about measures that you've done to offset tax increases for people under $30,000. I can see your logic with that. You're trying to protect people. But what are we doing for those very people when we increase the taxes of Nova Scotians? We're making our province less competitive. We're destroying people's incentive to go to work and to earn money. We have increases to the top marginal tax break, and I asked a question here the other day, Mr. Chair. Take physicians. Physicians work very hard in this province, and yes, they earn high incomes, and sometimes people can't realize, why somebody could ever be worth that much money, but these people work hard. They devote a significant portion of their life to their education. They come out, they work long hours, and I'm sure some of them are motivated by the money they earn, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what this NDP government is doing is they're taxing that. They're creating a disincentive for people to give their life to that cause. And that's not good. It's not good for our economy. It's not good in the business world either, Mr. Chair. So we've not seen, and I'm going to check it off my list here, Mr. Chair, we've not seen anything that this NDP government is going to do to change things for the better with this budget. And I expect, I don't know what they're going to do. They're complaining about the Tories now, but they're not doing anything to change the direction of the structural spending in government. And they don't appear to do this over the next 4 years. They have the power to do it. They're choosing not to do it. If I was sitting over there today, I would do it. And it's as simple as that. And I'm happy this is being put on the record. And what would I do? Well, I haven't heard what you would like to do. I'm trying to tell the truth. And you know what? I want to raise another point, Mr. Chair. I want to raise another point. If I was to put out a budget, perhaps something like that, what would this opposition do? They would start picking away at this, and then it would become about this and what's wrong with it. And most Nova Scotians aren't going to understand that. But I will tell you, Mr. Chair, and I'll give you my word on this, I went through the numbers in detail, every line item. And I can tell you that this budget could be balanced. It could be very close to being balanced this year. And if I took the approach that I did with this, from the date this government was elected, I think it would be balanced. And you can snicker, you can laugh, but I give you my word on that. I've got the numbers and I can back it up. Well, and you know what, Mr. Premier, I'm glad you asked that, because I want you to tell us what you would cut to change the structural expenditure you say is wrong with government. You have the power right now to change it, but you don't have the guts to change it. You're afraid.
Order, please. That remark was unparliamentary, and I will ask the honourable member to retract that statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will retract that statement. I do apologize for letting my emotions, but this is an important issue.
Thank you.
This is an important issue, and you know what? This, what does the Minister of Finance like to say? Is it this crew, he says, when he refers to the people opposite? The NDP, that crew there, that crew over there. You know, when John Hamm balanced the budget in 2002, 2003, and the following year, tough decisions were made. They were. Yeah, and that's probably why you voted against it. So you can't have it both ways. You're just telling me what would I cut, and then you're saying you wouldn't have voted for the ham budgets that brought expenditure under control, and then you turn around and say, well, we're not going to make any cuts, and that's evidenced by your budget. So it's traveling in a circle here, Mr. Speaker, and it's hard for people to follow, but I hope my comments are shedding some light on it for the people at home. And what else do I have here, Mr. Chair? I want to read a statement that the Premier had said. I'm going to read a portion. This came from the third reading of the Financial Measures Act in 2007 on the budget. And it says here, so the question is, why then would we vote in favor of it? Although it was a difficult decision, it is difficult for a government to spend almost $500 million in new revenue and not do some positive things. He says exactly. But yet, then he turns around and says he was left with a mess because he doesn't agree with the expenditures the Conservative government made before him. So it's inconsistent thinking, Mr. Chair, and let's let Nova Scotians decide. Let's let Nova Scotians decide if the Premier's word was good in advance of the election compared to what the actions of his government are today. So, one thing I want to ask the Premier, I want to give him a chance to answer this question. And I'm probably going to have to hear a lengthy response. But I want him to tell Nova Scotians what his government did to try to balance the budget.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do have a couple of words to say about this. First of all, thank you. First of all, I'd just like to deal with some of the assertions that were made by the member for Inverness, and I'll start with the first one he started with, and he said, well, you know, you guys were here, you voted for these budgets, you were the opposition, surely you knew that this was the difficult position that was building up. You knew that these were, if you say they were bad, why did you vote for them? You must have known what the situation is, and you're either, I think he said, incompetent, or I can't remember what the alternative was, but it was something equally as bad, I think. Well, and then he says, you know, I'm here. And I know the answers to balancing the budget, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. It's up to you, because you're the government, to take this. Well, if he really knows what the answer to the balancing the budget this year is, then we would surely like to see what he has to offer. But the reality is, Mr. Chairman, he won't make those kinds of things, make those kinds of representations, because he knows that the result would be severe and dramatic cuts to many of the services that the people of the province actually need. So I think terminal velocity is something like 32 feet per second, and I think the credibility of the member of Inverness was pretty much reaching that by the time he finished his question. And I was waiting for the parachute to open and save him, but it didn't. It is quite right that it is generations to come that will pay for the mess that was left behind by the previous government. But I want to give them just a couple of examples. For one thing, this budget managed, through the Expenditure Management Initiative, to take some $54 million in costs out of the budget. The position that we took with respect to pensions, Mr. Chairman, meant that we strengthened the pension plan overall, and we took $160 million worth of operating debt or deficit off the books by 2013. So we achieved both the reduction in the cost to government and secured the benefits that people expect that the members of the public service negotiated over many years in their collective agreement. So we managed to do both those things because that is fundamentally, and this is really what it comes down to. I mean, he obviously has done some homework and kind of looking back through the years and what people have said, but I don't think that he was really here to experience what happened in the early years of the Ham government, because I was here. And I remember the budgets as well, and I remember the lineups of people outside here and the protests, and I remember what he did, what the government did, what the government did with legislation, Bill 68, to take away collective bargaining rights, to impose wage settlements, to essentially destroy the relationship between the people who delivered the services in this province and the provincial government. Well, he's quite right. We have a different view of the way in which this has to operate. We don't believe that you have to come in and take those kinds of actions in order to be able to move the province back to balance. And in fact, even through what were difficult contract negotiations over the first 9 months of government, we managed to maintain the collective bargaining rights of the working people and to achieve the targets and goals set out by the government. And that, it's difficult. It takes hard work. It takes an actual belief in the system to make it work. But that's what this government is dedicated to, is the notion that you can, in fact, achieve a balance in your relationship and a balance, ultimately a balance in the finances of the province. And we have laid out a process, and this is what the member from Inverness doesn't want to say. We've laid out a process that, in fact, that gets us back to balanced budgets. That is the whole point of this exercise. It is to ensure that, just as the federal government says it's doing with over a much longer timetable, as other governments, both in this region and across the country, are doing, is they are taking the time that they need in order to be able to get the finances of the province back in order. Now, he talked about, of course, it's a one-sided argument for the member for Inverness, because he says you ought not to raise taxes, and therefore what you ought to do is make cuts. And he held up a piece of paper and he said, I've gone through it line by line, and I could bring this back to budget. Well, I wonder, Mr. Chairman, since in his question he obviously referred to that document. In fact, he showed it to the House. I wonder if you wouldn't mind having the member actually table that document, because I think this might be the first indication that we actually have that there's some sort of a plan over there from the member for Inverness. So while he responds to my request, and that maybe I'd have an opportunity to actually have a look at that document, I'll await your ruling, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I do believe that the honourable member from Inverness did make reference to that document in his debate. So I would ask that the honourable member from Inverness table that document at his convenience.
Mr. Chair, this discussion is about the estimates of the government today.
Order, please. Order, please. Is right. The honourable member did not read from the document, did not quote from the document, so the honourable member does not have to table the document. The honourable member from Inverness.
Mr. Chair, how much time is left?
Your time finishes at 2:32.
2:32. Well, I will. Well, you know, Mr. Chair, I think this is worthy of some discussion. We're for an idea of what to do. Well, as the leader of the.
They'll probably put you in cabinet, huh? Put you in cabinet, huh?
Mr. Chair, I think the ideas of the Conservatives should come out when the people have a chance to make them happen, and they certainly will come out. We do our homework, and I put a lot of thought into this, and I tell you, I can stand here and give my word to Nova Scotians that this government has absolutely. They probably could, but that will be up to them. But, Mr. Chair, you know, I only have a couple of minutes left here. I have 3 minutes left. I do think that this budget is not putting Nova Scotia in the right direction. It's not done anything to address. One significant point that was noted by somebody was that every time we look at government, at the budget, government has always tried to match expenditure to revenue, and I have seen no evidence in this budget of that. If revenues are flat, I've seen no evidence of this government trying to flatten expenses. And Mr. Chair, what we should be doing in this province is reducing tax. We should be reducing the size of government. We should be growing the private sector in our economy. And I have a lot of people back in my home area who are looking for work. I have grandparents that want to see opportunities for their children so that they can see their grandchildren somewhere close to home. This budget does nothing but weaken the economy of this province. And I don't want it anymore, and I can't wait until this NDP government is ousted from power so that we can start to put the province back on the right track again. And they can laugh, but you know what, Mr. Chair? Who was it that gave Nova Scotia balanced budgets? Who was it that reintroduced fiscal responsibility for Nova Scotia? His name was John Hamm. And I can smile and I can extend my arms proudly in knowing that it was a progressive conservative who brought Nova Scotia back from 40 years of deficit budgets to balanced budgets and strengthened the economy of this province. And we will be back to fight again someday, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order, please. Order. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition has the floor.
Well, I'm not quite sure where to start, Mr. Chair. Listen, I'm going to tell you, it was interesting to listen to the Premier and the member from Inverness speak. I had the opportunity in the by-election to campaign against the member. It was a campaign that I heard from door to door, that the people of Inverness were very proud of all three candidates who ran for them. And I know the people of Inverness could and did believe everything you told them. And I know today you can still look them in the eye and told them you didn't tell them one thing to get their vote and something else after the election campaign. It's been interesting to listen to the Premier ask the member from Inverness to table documents, so I will go back and ask the Premier. And 2 days ago we asked for some information to be tabled, that he would table the check that was issued by the Department of Justice to pay for his legal fees, that he would table some contractual information around the increase in salaries of the EAs, and I'm wondering if he has tabled that or if that information is available for us today.
Honourable the Premier.
No, I haven't had an opportunity to pursue the first. We will make sure that get to that in due course. I've asked the officials to have a look for them. With respect to the contract information, I can tell you what that is about. Initially, the EAs were brought on a casual basis, and their amounts were to be determined and the scale set at a later date. And the increases reflect the later amounts that were determined to be the appropriate scale for the EAs. And I'm sure that the member understands that that is the function of transition, is to bring on staff and to look at where they're going to fall over time.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No, I appreciate that, and I look forward to the remaining information being tabled. I know that the Minister of Justice referenced it in the Justice estimates, so it shouldn't be that difficult for I think the department to be able to find that, and we should have that before we finish debate, I hope, here in the House on the budget. The other, and you referenced at the beginning, in the opening of your summation here a few days, or the beginning of your talk at the beginning of the estimates, around the 1% reduction in government spending. Would you be, I know in the Justice estimates, the Minister of Justice tabled where the 1% of reduction and the reductions in his department were, line by line. Would you table for us the reductions that happened across government and department by department?
Honourable the Premier.
I'm here, of course, to answer to the estimates of the Premier's office, not to the other estimates that are there. So he can have the opportunity to ask the other ministers for theirs. I'm happy to ask my officials with respect to the ministries that I'm responsible for, and I'm not sure what the Minister of Justice said. So, of course, and that's one of the problems, with the manner in which the member frames his questions. He, of course, refers to things which I don't actually have knowledge of. So, I'll see what it was that the Minister of Justice actually responded to, and, of course, take the opportunity to provide you in due course with the answers with respect to my particular estimates. And of course, I have not just the Premier's office, I also have the Office for Intergovernmental Affairs. I also have the Office of Aboriginal Affairs. I'm also responsible for military relations, so I'm pleased to deal with those.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find it hard to believe that the Premier is not willing to put on the table and table for the people of Nova Scotia where the reductions took place in government. You said there was going to be a 1% reduction. The Minister of Justice laid it on the table. You're in charge of the entire government. Those people work for you that sit in the front bench. You sit there in the front. You're there. You oversee government. It was laid out very easily. He took one page, estimate reductions 2010-11, and tabled it. Why would you be unwilling to do that, Mr. Premier? Why wouldn't you be willing to do that? You're in charge of the government. The decisions that were made by you. This goes back to question period when we started debating the silly idea of whether or not people who have committed to wanting to solve a problem in southwestern Nova Scotia should have their names in public. I mean, they've come forward to be part of the solution, and you're sitting here being this is a silly debate. So why don't you put it out there? Explain to the people of the province. Explain to the people of the province why you're unwilling to tell them, department by department, what the reductions were.
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Chairman, when I'm called to respond to the estimates for the Premier's office and for the departments for which I'm responsible for, that is what I am prepared to respond to. It is in fact the opposition parties who decide who's going to be here in the main chamber. And in this case, I'm here to answer to these particular estimates, and he's referenced other issues in the House, Mr. Chairman. the reality is that what the minister actually said in the House of Assembly was that he wanted to make sure that in releasing the names and the organizations who are participating, that they were comfortable with those names being released. And I don't see anything untoward or inappropriate with that. In fact, it seems to me to be exactly what those people would expect. The member knows that the functions of estimates is in order to bring the individual ministers from the departments before the House of Assembly so that they have the opportunity to speak directly to their estimates. Well, that's why I'm here. Now, there are other ministers who are here who are waiting for the opportunity to be able to respond, but the members of the opposition, for whatever reason, have decided that they're either not interested in the estimates of transportation, who else? Education, so. He's quite right. This is a silly debate, but yet it is he that is asking the questions. So, Mr. Chairman, we're here. What we are left with is a big challenge, and he congratulates the member for Inverness, and he says, "I'm sure that you're able to look the people of your riding in the eye, and yet you told them something during the campaign." And I tell you something, Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to go around this province as the leader of the government and the leader of my party, and I tell them forthrightly that we kept every single commitment we made in the first year of our government, just as we said we would. That we took the HST off of home electricity, that we took, I said in the current year.
Order, please.
Yeah.
Order.
What about the balanced budget? What about the balanced budget?
Order, please.
And what we saw as a result of what happened in the previous government, right? And what we are going to do is we are going to bring the province back into balance over the course of time. That, Mr. Chairman.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable the Premier. Order, please. The Honourable the Premier has the floor.
We're going to bring the province's finances back into balance in a reasonable fashion. We are not, and he says on the one hand, I can hear the members from across. Unfortunately, I can hear them from across the floor as they say they carp about decisions like what was made in Yarmouth. Well, the reality is there was an unsustainable service in Yarmouth, and what we're doing is to take that money and to ensure that we invest in strengthening southwest Nova Scotia. I mean, that is part of the problem. These are exactly the kinds of decisions that got made by the previous government that put us in the position that we're in now. They're unsustainable. You cannot continue in the short term to pour money into things that are failing and cannot be sustained. They say on the one hand, why aren't you cutting the expenses of government? What they really mean is, of course, is why aren't you cutting the jobs of the people in the public service? Why aren't you cutting the nurses? Why aren't you cutting the teachers? Why aren't you cutting the people who deliver the frontline services to the province of Nova Scotia? That is what they are really saying, Mr. Chairman. And it's not rhetoric. It's real. And I was here during 2002, 2003, and I saw the effects of those budgets. They didn't do them on the basis of layoffs. They didn't do them on the basis of attrition. They went into departments. They cut people. They rolled back wages. They destroyed the collective bargaining process. I want to tell you, it was a very, very difficult time in the history of this province. Just compare that to the manner.
Order, please.
Just compare that to the manner in which we have approached the management of the finances of the province and the government of Nova Scotia. We came in and said we are going to respect the rights of our civil service, of the public service. We're going to work with them. We're going to try and we're going to make sure that we are bargaining in good faith. They know what the objectives of the government are. and they know that we have to be able to bring the finances of the province back into balance. Well, you know, Mr. Chairman, that is exactly what we intend to do. When we got elected, we said there would be a new home rebate. The members opposite were extremely critical of it, and yet it was enthusiastically endorsed by Nova Scotians. In fact, they took up the offer, and what they did was they reinvested.
The Honourable the Premier has the floor.
I think you've been told. The people of Nova Scotia enthusiastically endorsed what it was that the province was doing, and in fact exhausted the entire amount of the program. They took Mr. Chairman, they took at our word that we would do away with the practice of deposits for seniors in long-term care facilities, and we did that just exactly as we said we would do. And Mr. Chairman, we said that what we would do is we would set a new renewable energy status, renewable energy standard, which we did, which has been enthusiastically applauded, not just in this country, but has been noticed, you know, throughout the environmental world, Mr. Chairman. So, you know, the reality is that he can go through the checklist of things that we said we would do in the current year. We did them. And as we said we would, and I think, you know, my government and our caucus have every reason to be proud of the things that we have been accomplishing. Because fundamentally, if, as the member says, and if, as the member from Inverness said, if you really want young people to stay in this province, then you got to get the finances of the province back under control. You got to make sure that this is a place that they want to live. And if you cut jobs, if you cut and take money out of the economy, that does not strengthen the economy. That weakens the economy. In fact, that is exactly the philosophical and economic principle that the federal government was focusing on with the stimulus package. It was not to take money out of the economy at a time when the world was slipping into recession. So what the members who say that you should be cutting jobs and you should be cutting services are essentially saying is that you are prepared to go down the road, toward actually weakening the economy of the province by removing money out of the economy. We happen to be fortunate here in the province because over and above the money we invest in services, we also happen to be the regional centre for the federal government, so we end up with a lot of reasonable paying federal government jobs that put money into our economy. We are also the home of the Navy. Mr. Chairman. So we have more armed forces personnel in this province than any other province in Canada. And that is an extraordinary benefit to the province. And I don't know if the Leader of the Opposition has had the opportunity or not to read Mr. Moreira's book. It's called Backwater, which he talks about the province and what he sees as some of the economic challenges. And one of the things he talks about is the level of government spend. Yes, I have. He looks at
The one you canceled. The one you're hiding behind.
Order, please.
What are you doing in secret?
Order, please. The Honourable the Premier has the floor.
He actually sees as a negative thing that he actually talks about the fact that there's government spending in the region as a negative. He says too much of the economy is based on government spending without seeming to understand the complex nature of the manner in which that spending takes place in this particular region. Now, on the one hand, the Leader of the Opposition says you've canceled the tax review, and then on the other hand, he says, no, you're carrying out a tax review, but you're hiding behind it because it's being somehow done in secret. And what he doesn't seem to understand is that the Department of Finance is always looking at the tax system, is always looking at are always looking at the manner in which the people of the province are being affected by the level of taxation. And that is exactly why we took the measures that we took to protect the people in the province with respect to the increase in the HST. We specifically decided to bring in the poverty reduction tax credit. We brought in the affordability tax credit to ensure that people, the poorest people in our province, actually benefited from this budget rather than were worse off. The people of the province who fall in those categories are going to have more money in their pockets. They're going to be better off as a result of this budget. Taking the tax off of children's clothing, taking the tax off electricity. Who, Mr. Chairman, would benefit the most from those? They would be families of modest and poor levels of income for whom those particular commodities make up a larger part of their income. Those are the people who are going to benefit. Another group, Mr. Chairman, who are going to benefit from this budget are seniors who receive the guaranteed income supplement, because we changed the tax rules so that they will no longer pay income tax if they receive the GIS. In addition, they will qualify for the affordability tax credit. So they will end up with more money in their pockets. So of course we're concerned about the levels of taxation, but we are concerned about the level of fairness in the manner in which taxation takes place. Because I have to tell you, we know that taxation is not going to go away anytime soon. We know that the taxation. We know that the taxation that we have in the province makes up the broad envelope, which is the commonwealth of our province. And it is with that financial envelope that we are currently discussing in these estimates. It is with that financial envelope that we seek to provide the very services that the people of the province need. This is what strengthens the hospital system. This is what strengthens the very emergency service that I believe the member for Annapolis is very concerned about. And he should be. He should be concerned about the emergency services around the province, because the reality is they are facing great challenges from one end of the province to the other. So it is with the grant of supply that we are able to address issues just like that. It is why, for example, we hired the emergency room advisor, a commitment which we made during the election campaign. If we hadn't had hired Mr. Ross to carry out the examination of the emergency room system, what is it that the member would be saying right now? He would be saying, why didn't you keep your commitment to hire an emergency room advisor? Well, we did. And he's come back with an interim report. He's looking for the manner in which we can strengthen that system and provide the services that people need in their communities when they need them. That is the function of government. That is the challenge that we took on in government. That is how we respond to the budget challenges that we have. We've done the same in education. We recognize that the university sector makes up a large portion of the budget of the province. And we understand that there were prepayments by way of memorandum of understanding that said that there was an amount of money, I believe it's $360 million, that's paid out to the university sector. We know that there's great value in that money when it goes out the door into universities, because it supports the young people of the province. But we also know that there has to be an opportunity for us to sit down with the management of the universities, with the university presidents, and have a conversation with them about the future direction of universities in the province, and how they can maximize their relationship to the government and to the economy of Nova Scotia. And that is the job that Dr. Tim O'Neill is currently engaged in, and I understand that I think the Leader of the Opposition wasn't paying attention when I moved from the emergency system into the universities. He says I'm right. He wasn't paying attention, which is somewhat disturbing, considering these are the estimates of my office. Dr. O'Neill is doing that work with the university sector to try and ensure that what we are getting out of the university sector is best value for the province as a whole, for the economy, and I believe, and I think that this is the practicality of those engagements is that they are finding that the universities very much want to be part of the solution to the difficult challenges that face the province. And I for one, am very proud of the work that's taking place, because it's part of the commitment that we made as a government to get ourselves back on the appropriate financial path. And those are just a few of my thoughts on that, and I know that the Leader of the Opposition has additional questions. So,
the Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't mind getting an answer, and perhaps a truthful one at some point. I listened to the Premier stand in this House until just a few minutes ago. He kept every commitment to the people of Nova Scotia that he made. You promised them a balanced budget. You haven't kept it. Promised them no tax increase. Promised a self-managed care program for seniors. They haven't seen it in year one. And yet you stand in the House and you tell them you kept every commitment, knowing full well you haven't. This is very much like the campaign. I mean, you spend more time looking for someone to hide behind than standing in front of the people, being upfront with them. Is that too much to ask of the person who's in charge of the province of Nova Scotia politically? No, you're not. You sat here in the House, you kept every commitment you made to the people, and you didn't. The current year was a balanced budget. Current year was no tax increase. Current year was a self-managed care program, which hasn't been kept. It hasn't been kept. I read the platform.
Order, please.
Minister of Health is suggesting I read the platform. We've read the platform. All Nova Scotians have. And they're talking about it quite loudly, which is interesting. The other interesting thing, I hear a member from Citadel Sable Island back there.
Fire into the cabinet.
He might get there someday, maybe. I don't know. But it's interesting to listen and talk as Dr. Ross is traveling around the province talking about emergency rooms. All Nova Scotians know the challenge with the emergency rooms. It's this government that said they're going to keep them open 24/7. What the district health authorities have been doing, and particularly the one I live in, and I'm sure all across the province, is they've been working with their health authorities, with their hospitals, to try to determine how they can best redirect those Nova Scotians who are going into emergency room for basic health care. Coming up with great solutions, but instead, they're getting at the same time is Dr. Ross coming into those communities, creating great anxiety. We know what the problem is with the emergency rooms. We know what the problem is. I'm hearing the member from Sable Island again, Citadel Sable Island again, saying what? That's exactly what I'm telling you. When you come to riding of Annapolis, there's been great public outcry because the uncertainty. Is this another commitment the government's backing away from? I mean, at the same time, the health authority in the Annapolis Valley was coming in to look for solutions. Well, how do we redirect those patients who shouldn't be coming to an emergency room? Why, there's patients coming to have prescriptions filled. And they're trying to find those solutions. And for the Premier to stand in the House today and say that he's kept every promise he's made is simply not true. It's simply not true. So you didn't say you were going to balance. You didn't say you were going to balance the budget. You didn't say there isn't a single Nova Scotian. There isn't anyone in the province of Nova Scotia that figures out where you're coming from when you say that. You said you're going to live within your means and balance your budget, and you haven't. You haven't.
June 9th.
You said you weren't going to raise taxes, and you have. And from day one, instead of governing, you're looking for someone to get behind and hide. I don't think that's the new thing Nova Scotia was looking for, the new way of governing. Stand up and be counted. You told them one thing and you're doing another. Explain to them why you backed away, but don't go say we kept all of our commitments, because you haven't. And the people sitting behind you know that. And the people sitting in those other seats know that. To stand to the people and say you've kept them, you know you haven't. Mr. Chair, it's interesting when I listened to the Premier go on about funding to universities and the prepayment. That was never talked about during the election campaign. The previous government, which you were a member of, prepaid out of a surplus. They didn't borrow money. They paid it out of a surplus. What we did as a province, what your government did, was go against the advice you got from Deloitte, which Deloitte said, do not prepay. So you went against it. Paid $100,000 for advice you didn't want to take. I think Nova Scotians deserve an explanation. The explanation is it was political. You were doing it to try to blame it on the previous government, because it was a decision they made. Well, they made lots of decisions that have costs going forward. Are we going to just back them all up? Prepay them all? It's a silly notion. You know that. And you know that. And to stand in this House again and tell Nova Scotians that you've kept every commitment you made during the election campaign is not accurate, and you know it. Mr. Speaker, we got an economic panel. I spoke about it in the beginning, and I would